Number 10, Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw.
There was a path that came through here, and some kids were actually riding dirt bikes, and they got a foul odor.
Rhonda Renee Johnson and Sharon Lynn Shaw were two American girls who disappeared in Harris County, Texas on the afternoon of August 4th, 1971. In early 1972, the skeletal remains of both girls were discovered in and around Clear Lake near Galveston Bay. A local man, Michael Lloyd Self, was charged with the executions in 1972 and convicted of Shaw's execution in 1975. Controversy arose in 1998 when convicted Terminator Edward Harold Bell confessed to both executions. Bell's confession and corroborating statements from both law enforcement and prosecutors that Self had been coerced into a false confession led many to believe that Self had been wrongfully convicted. Self passed away in prison in 2000. The case has often been associated with the Texas Deli Fields, a 25-acre section of land off of Interstate 45 in League City, where the bodies of 4 young women have been discovered since the 1980s.
2 years later, they found the skeleton of another young woman. While the police were looking around the area, they come across a third skeleton, one after another after another.
A fictionalized film about the area, titled Texas Deli Fields, was released in 2011.
911, what is your emergency?
Help me. A man in my house.
On January 3rd, 1972, 2 guys fishing in Clear Lake discovered a human skull floating in the water, which they had initially believed to be a sports ball. 6 weeks later, searchers discovered the rest of the body, along with that of another girl in a marsh near the lake. According to a coroner's inquest filed on February 17, 1972, the skull found in the lake was determined via dental records to have belonged to Shaw. Additionally, a crucifix found wrapped around the jawbone of the skull was identified by Shaw's mother to have belonged to her daughter. The other body found in the marsh was positively identified as Johnson. Number 9, Michelle Garvey. Michelle Garvey went missing from New London, Connecticut, presumably after running away from home on June 1st, 1982. She was believed to have intended to return to her birth state, New Jersey, or to North Carolina. She had a previous history of running away, according to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Initially, it was unknown what happened to Garvey, as she may have left home to start a new life and was thought to have possibly been still alive. Garvey's body was found on July 1st, 1982 in Baytown, Texas, 1 month after she went missing. Authorities were unable to identify her body, but could determine that the victim was a white female between 15 and 20 years old with blue eyes and curly red hair. The cause of removal of the victim was determined to be strangulation. The girl was also approximately 5 feet 1 inch to 5 feet 3 inches, or 1.6 meters tall, and had one of her ears pierced. Her body was found wearing brown clothing, including a long-sleeved button-down shirt with a distinct horse embroidery on the breast pocket. Her pants were made of corduroy material. The body was disposed of in a field after she passed away, possibly merely hours after her slaughter. She was buried near 2 other unidentified slaughter victims found in 1981 who were identified in 2021 as Dean and Tina Klaus. Number 8, Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson. Galveston residents Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson both disappeared. People who knew them stated that the two had been best friends since childhood and were almost inseparable. Besides, the pair shared a love for surfing, and being teenage girls, were pretty popular with their friends' circle. They were also brilliant students and had big aspirations for their future, which were destroyed by a crime fueled by hatred. Debbie and Maria were supposed to travel to Houston, Texas on November 15, 1971. However, since the girls were traveling together, they assured their parents that they would somehow hitchhike to the place. Moreover, they were also excited to be journeying on their own and set out early in the day. Later, Galveston residents mentioned that they spotted Debbie and Maria standing near an island ice cream shop, tagging down passing vehicles. Eventually, a man in a white van stopped by the curbside and picked the girls up after agreeing to drive them to Houston. Shockingly, that was the last time anyone saw Debbie and Maria alive, as they disappeared soon after. When Debbie and Maria's family learned that the teens had not reached Houston on time, they got extremely worried and contacted local authorities. Galveston police got in touch with law enforcement officials in Houston, and the authorities launched a statewide search for the missing girls. There was absolutely no news for 2 days, and the families began fearing the worst. Tragically, their fears were confirmed when Debbie and Maria's deceased bodies were eventually located in Turner's Bayou near Texas City. An autopsy later mentioned that both teens were shot before being tied down and drowned in the bayou. Number 7. Donna Gonsalves Prudhomme. In 1991, people passing the fields found a fourth body of a woman who was referred to as a Jane Doe until January 2019 when Audrey Lee Cook was also identified. Donna Gonsalves Prudhomme lived most of her life in Port Arthur, Texas, and was married with 2 sons. She left her husband and took her children when he became abusive, the FBI reported. Donna asked her sister, Diane, to mail her birth certificate to her home in Clear Lake near the end of the 1980s, and after that, she never heard from Donna again. Prudhomme's sister said she was a beautiful woman and mother and loved fishing and Cajun food, according to the FBI. Number 6. Laura Miller. Laura Miller had recently moved to League City with her family and also went missing. Miller was musically gifted, according to the FBI, and attended Clear Creek High School, per People magazine. She had a rough time in school as she began to have seizures that forced her to miss school, quit her choir, and have trouble in her social life. On September 10th, 1984, she asked if she could call her boyfriend from a payphone, since her family's phone wasn't set up yet, according to the FBI. Her mother agreed and drove her to a payphone, with Laura walking half a mile to get back home. She never made it back to the house, and police deemed her just a runaway at first. But months passed without the family hearing from her, and on February 2nd, 1986, 17 whole months after she first disappeared, her body was discovered by 2 children playing in the woods near a dirt trail just south of League City, right by the very same field as where another person was found, per ABC 13 and the FBI. Number 5. Audrey Lee Cook. While searching for another individual, police found a third unidentified body, naming her a Jane Doe, until she was identified in January 2019. Cook was a 30-year-old mechanic living in Houston, Channel View, and Heights in Texas. Her family described her as free-spirited, according to ABC 13. The last time she was ever seen was in December 1985, which is also when her family stopped hearing from her. On February 2nd, 1986, the same day Miller was found, detectives discovered Audrey Lee's decomposed body, which showed that she had been shot in the back and had several broken ribs, ABC 13 reported. She was identified after 33 years using technology to reconstruct her face and showing it on the news, per ABC 13. Eventually, the FBI got involved and they were eventually able to determine their identity. Number 4. Sandra Rambler. Sandra was last seen in her family's residence in Santa Fe, Texas on October 26, 1983. She disappeared from their house and has not been seen again. The door to the home was open and biscuits were baking in the oven at the time Sandra vanished. Her coat and purse were also located inside the residence. She was initially believed to have gone to the store for a moment, but she never returned to the house. Some reports may state that Sandra disappeared while en route to school during the morning hours. Sandra's father reported her as a missing person during the following morning. Authorities initially classified her as a runaway, though the circumstances surrounding her disappearance are unclear. Several investigators believed Sandra may have started a new life for herself with an assumed identity, but there is little evidence available in her case. Sandra's case may be related to a string of disappearances and/or slaughters of young women from the Galveston County, Texas area since the 1970s. Michelle Thomas vanished in 1985 and Suzanne Renee Richardson disappeared in 1988. Law enforcement has not determined if these 4 cases are connected. Number 3. Janet Doe. While leads have dwindled over the years, science and technology have advanced. In January 2019, Renison received a call that breathed new life into this cold case, the identification of Jane Doe and Janet Doe. Jane Doe, found in 1986, was Audrey Lee Cook. Cook had worked as a mechanic and lived in the Houston Channel View and area Heights of Texas. She was last seen in December 1985. Janet Doe, who was found in 1991, was identified as Donna Gonsalves Prudhomme, mentioned earlier. Knowing the names of the women has given Renison and the local police something to work for. They're contacting neighbors and friends and reviewing police records from that time. A key part of the investigation is appealing to the public for help. Renison and local police need to talk to anyone who can provide additional information. Details as simple as where the women worked or the names of their friends who haven't been interviewed yet could be key to solving the slaughters. Number 2. Audrey Cook. An unidentified person described as a free-spirited individual who was a motorcyclist moved into the Houston area with her girlfriend in 1976 from Memphis, Tennessee at age 21, following a number of years residing in California. She had worked as a mechanic for a Golf Cart Company in 1979, Harrison Equipment Company in 1980, Balloon Affair in 1981, and then as a mechanic for National Rent-A-Car during unknown times. She was last heard from in late December 1985 and is believed to have sold and used substances. She was also said to have become associated with the wrong crowd. Despite this, her family received numerous letters indicating her life was enjoyable at the time, though lacking specificity with details that could be valuable during the investigation into her passing. Her family had spent years trying to locate her. Their remains were found in a field in the 3000 block of Calder Road, on the same day that the body of Laura Miller was located nearby. The victims' bodies were not buried, rather hidden from view. Both were left in a supine position near a tree. At the time, Miller's case had already received significant public attention, having been reported missing nearly a year and a half before. The crime scene contained a significant amount of debris. Investigators were thorough in documenting potential evidence at the scene, including discarded keys, shoes, business cards, and hair. The victim had been shot in the back, and she had suffered additional injuries to several ribs. Similarly, Heidi Fye, 25, discovered in the same vicinity, had also suffered significant trauma to the ribs. Number 1. Shelly Sykes. On May 24, 1986, a day of drinking at the beach ended when John Robert King, driving Gerald Swartz's car, ran Sykes off the road as she drove home from working at Guido's restaurant along with Galveston Seawall. Sykes' car was found the next morning along Interstate 45 near Dickinson, and the 19-year-old college student was never seen alive again. Sykes is presumed terminated, but her body was never found. In 1987, King called El Paso police from a motel there and confessed to the crime, but without a body, police could not charge him or Zwarst with slaughter. The men were convicted of aggravated kidnapping in separate trials in 1988, and both were sentenced to life in prison. Although they were not ruling on slaughter charges, former Galveston County Sheriff Gene Leonard said when interviewed in 2007 that jurors in both trials were convinced that King and Zwarst ended Sykes. Zwarst had his first parole hearing in June 2007, 20 years after his conviction. The parole board denied his request and ordered that he become eligible again after 5 years, the maximum period under Texas law. Number 10. Yulon Adonai Archaga Carrillo. A Honduran fugitive and the suspected leader of the MS-13 gang in Honduras, who was added to the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list on November 3, 2021, Yulon is wanted for racketeering, narcotics trafficking, and firearms offenses. Archaga Carrillo is allegedly in charge of MS-13 for all of Honduras, and is believed to be providing firearms, narcotics, and cash to gang members who are operating within the United States. He's also believed to be responsible for ordering the executions of rival gang members. Authorities believe he is still in Honduras. Archaga Carrillo was the 526th fugitive to be placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. He replaced American fugitive Robert William Fisher, who was removed from the list for no longer meeting the list criteria. The FBI is offering a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to his capture. Number 9. Gilmer Hofdrad. Hofdrad was born on the 17th of December 1962 in Paramaribo. He is a chess player and became national youth champion in 1978, 1979, and 1980. He studied economics at the University of Santiago de Cuba, and in 1988, Hofdrad started working for the Central Bank of Suriname and was a part-time lecturer at the Anton de Kom University. In 1991, he became a full-time professor. In 1999, he started working for the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. In 2010, Hofdrad was appointed governor of the central bank. In 2015, he was appointed to the Ministry of Finance of Suriname in the cabinet of Desi Bouterse. During his tenure, he took out 92 loans, increasing the debt from $9.2 billion to $20.7 billion in Suriname currency. In 2019, the Progressive Reform Party reported Hofdrad to the Prosecutor General for exceeding the debt ceiling. On the 1st of November 2019, the National Assembly voted for a new law which no longer criminalized exceeding the debt ceiling. In January 2020, it was reported that $100 million in US currency was missing from the cash reserves at the central bank. Vice President Ashwin Adden explained that the money was used to buy potatoes and onions. In April 2021, the Prosecutor General filed a request to prosecute Hofdrad for dubious transactions between the central bank and the Belgian company Clearfield. On the 11th of July, an Interpol red notice was issued for money laundering, embezzlement, and corruption. On the 23rd of July, an exit ban was issued. On the 30th of July, it was reported that he had been spotted in Skeldon, Guyana. On the 17th of December 2021, Hofdrad was sentenced in absentia to 12 years imprisonment and a fine of $500,000. He was found guilty of violating the anti-corruption laws, misuse of state resources, participating in a criminal organization, and embezzlement. On the 24th of December, an appeal was filed. Number 8. Billy Alvarez. Guillermo Hector Alvarez Cuevas was born on the 8th of September 1945 to Guillermo Alvarez Marcia and Maria del Carmen Cuevas Saldana in the town of Haso Hidalgo. Alvarez Cuevas is the eldest of 3 siblings, Jose Alfredo, Maria del Carmen, and Maria Gilda. Alvarez briefly played professional football at Cruz Azul Hidalgo as a forward in 1976. In 1986, Alvarez became president of the football club Cruz Azul. He was later appointed chairman of Cooperativa La Cruz Azul SCL on the 1st of July 1988. On the 28th of May 2020, the Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera froze the financial accounts of Alvarez, his brother Jose Alfredo, and ex-vice president of Cruz Azul, Victor Manuel Garces, citing money laundering and financial ties to shell companies worth over 300 million pesos, which is approximately $15 million in US currency. Their investigation suggested that between 2013 and 2020, 1.2 billion Mexican pesos, or $60.6 million US dollars, were transferred from the Cruz Azul cooperative into personal offshore bank accounts, namely in the US and Spain. On the 26th of July 2020, the Attorney General of Mexico, Alejandro Gertz Manero, issued an arrest warrant for Alvarez and Garces for ties with criminal organizations. Arrest warrants were also issued for directors of the Cruz Azul Cooperative, Miguel Eduardo Burrell, Mario Sanchez Alvarez, and Angel Martin Junquera. Cruz Azul faced disaffiliation from the Mexican Football Federation as a result of Alvarez's legal issues. He resigned as the general manager of the cooperative and subsequently stepped down as president of the football club on the 1st of August 2020 after 32 years as acting president. Jamie Ordiales was then appointed as the cooperative's general manager and the club's president. Number 7. Jan Marsalik. Marsalik went to school in Austria but did not obtain a degree. At the age of 19, he founded an e-commerce software company. He started working for Wirecard in 2000 and was initially hired for his knowledge on WAP systems. On the 1st of February 2010, he became the firm's chief operating officer and also joined the company board. His last known residence before he became a fugitive was in Munich. Marsalik is considered one of the main culprits in the Wirecard accounting scandal. The Financial Times reported that Marsalik is a person of interest for a number of European governments due to his alleged links to Russian intelligence. Investigation by Bellingcat, Der Spiegel, and The Insider indicated that Marsalik flew to Minsk hours after he was fired. On the 19th of July 2020, the German Handelsblatt reported that Marsalik was suspected to be in Russia, where he was believed to live under supervision of GRU in a mansion near Moscow. According to Russian media, Marsalik could have been a longtime asset of GRU, recruited at the end of the 1990s through the Austrian-Russian Friendship Society. Among his friends were GRU Colonel Andriy Chuprigin, Stanislav Petlinsky, former officer to the presidential administration in Russia, as well as Rami al-Obaidi, former chief of Libyan intelligence. Marsalik boasted about trips he made to Palmyra as a guest of the Russian military, and helped set up the presence of the Wagner Group in Libya. In August 2020, Interpol issued a red notice for Marsalik, which is a request to law enforcement worldwide to locate and arrest him pending extradition. Number 6. Monica Witt. Monica Elfriede Witt is a former United States Air Force technician sergeant and defense contractor who defected to Iran in 2013. She is a fugitive from a United States Department of Justice indictment for espionage against the United States since 2018. Born in Texas, Witt enlisted in the US Air Force in 1997 as a linguist and studied the Persian language at the Defense Language Institute before becoming an airborne cryptologic language analyst. She was then assigned to the Department of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, OSI, as an enlisted counterintelligence special agent until separating from the Air Force in 2008. She continued working in intelligence as a military contractor until 2010. After her 2012 conversion to Islam in Iran, Witt became increasingly focused on the religion and the region. Her master's degree capstone presentation lauded them both, and she was soon affiliated with Marzia Hashmi, a suspected Iranian intelligence operative. With Hashemi's assistance, Witt defected to Iran in 2013 and provided the Islamic Republic with assistance and intelligence stemming from her work for and with the United States government. Number 5. Eugene Palmer. A federal arrest warrant was issued for Eugene Palmer on June 10, 2013. He was wanted at the time for an execution he committed. Family members of his have expressed their belief that he passed away in the park. However, according to Haverstraw police, nobody was ever discovered after multiple searches of the area. Palmer depends on medications for a heart condition and diabetes. Eugene Palmer is an outdoorsman, an experienced hunter, angler, and hiker, and is also described as a car enthusiast. He has a deformed left thumb. Authorities believed he may be hiding in Florida or upstate New York, where he has relatives. On May 29, 2019, Palmer was added to the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list. On August 17, 2021, acting on a tip, the FBI searched the home of one of Palmer's granddaughters in Warwick, New York, but ultimately found nothing. On July 20, 2022, Palmer was removed from the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list, and it was determined that he no longer fit the list criteria. He was replaced by Omar Alexander Cardenas. Despite his removal, he remains a wanted fugitive. Number 4. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, commonly referred to by his alias El Mencho, is a Mexican substance lord and leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, an organized crime group based in Jalisco. He is the most wanted person in Mexico and one of the most wanted in the US. Both governments are offering up to $30 million in Mexican currency and $10 million in United States currency, respectively, for information leading to his arrest. He is wanted for substance trafficking, organized crime involvement, and undocumented possession of firearms. El Mencho is allegedly responsible for coordinating global substance trafficking operations. Under his command, the CJNG became one of Mexico's leading criminal organizations. Born into poverty in Mexico, El Mencho grew avocados and dropped out of primary school before immigrating illegally to the US in 1980s. After being arrested several times, he was deported to Mexico in the early 1990s and worked for the Milenio cartel. He eventually climbed to the top of the criminal organization and founded the CJNG after several of his bosses were arrested or terminated. His notoriety is also a result of his aggressive leadership and sensationalist acts of violence against both rival criminal groups and Mexican security forces alike. These attacks brought him increased government attention and an extensive manhunt. Security forces suspect he is hiding in the rural terrains of Jalisco, Michoacán, Nayarit, and or Colima, and is guarded by mercenaries with former military training. In February 2022, unconfirmed reports began to surface that El Mencho passed away in a private hospital in Guadalajara, but he still could be out there. Number 3. Badrash Kumar Patel. On the night of April 12, 2015, Patel and Palak, his wife, were working a night shift at a Dunkin' Donuts in Hanover, Maryland. The store was owned by a relative of Patel, whom the couple were visiting. Surveillance footage showed Palak and Patel walking together in the kitchen at around 9:30 p.m. before disappearing out of view behind some racks. Moments later, Patel re-emerged without his wife, turned off an oven, and left the store. The body of 21-year-old Palak Patel was found later that night. She had been beaten and stabbed multiple times with a large kitchen knife. Investigators believe the couple had an argument, with Palak wanting to return to India and Patel wishing to remain in the US instead. Authorities believed Patel could have fled the country or could be hiding with relatives. Patel had a visa to be in the US, but it had expired by the time he carried out the execution. A report stated that because of this, there was no indication he was able to legally leave the country. An investigation with Palak's family into the termination revealed that the last conversation she had with them was about wishing to return home to India. This call was made moments before Palak was ended by her husband and had been overheard by him. Police believe that Patel removed his wife for this reason. Patel has connections in Canada, India, New Jersey, Kentucky, Georgia, and Illinois. A reward up to $100,000 is available for information that leads to his whereabouts. Number 2. Arnaldo Jimenez. Arnaldo Jimenez and Estrella Carrera were married on May 11, 2012 at Chicago City Hall. Carrera had 2 children. The couple had dinner with family and friends one night and then headed to a nightclub, which they left at around 4 a.m. on the morning of May 12th. It is believed by the FBI that on the way home, the couple got into a heated argument in Jimenez's black 2006 4-door Maserati. Jimenez then fatally stabbed Carrera multiple times in his car and dragged her body into her apartment. Carrera's body was dumped in the bathtub at her apartment, and she was still wearing the same silver dress she wore to the wedding. Carrera was meant to pick up her children from family members on May 12th, but she never showed up. Her family members then reported her missing to police. Her body was found inside her apartment on the afternoon of May 13th, and police confirmed there was no sign of a forced entry. Jimenez had also disappeared and his car was nowhere to be found. 3 days later, on May 15th, Jimenez was charged with first-degree execution and a state warrant was issued for his arrest. A federal warrant followed after he was charged with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution on May 17th. Investigators began tracking Jimenez and found that on May 12th he had used his cell phone in Chicago, then southern Illinois. It was later used in Memphis, Tennessee, and then in Arkansas. On May 13th, he had made calls from Houston and then in Hidalgo, Mexico. In September 2012, police made a substance arrest on Jimenez's brother, Humberto. During the search of his property, police discovered Arnaldo's black Maserati in the garage. Blood was found inside the car, leading police to the conclusion that Jimenez had ended Carrera in his car and then dragged her body into the bathtub inside her apartment. Police believe Humberto drove Arnaldo to Mexico in his car and left him there. The FBI believes Jimenez is still hiding in Durango, Mexico, specifically in the area of Santiago Papasquero, and he may also be hiding in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, Mexico. Number 1. Vassilis Palacastus. Palacastus grew up in a small village in the mountains of central Greece. Palacastus became famous for his habit of giving most of his money to poor families, making him a local Robin of the Poor, reminiscent of the famous tale of Robin Hood. In 2000, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the 1995 kidnapping of Alexander Haitaglu, the CEO of Haitaglu Brothers. On the afternoon of Sunday, June 4th, 2 accomplices hired a trip on a sightseeing helicopter from Agios Kosmas, a coastal suburb of Athens. They hijacked the helicopter using a pistol and a hand grenade and forced the pilot to fly to a prison. When the helicopter arrived, guards believed the helicopter was a visit from prison inspectors. The helicopter flew the prisoners to a cemetery nearby, where they transferred to motorcycles and fled from there. Palacastus was recaptured 2 years later on August 2nd, 2008, in Thessaloniki. On the afternoon of Sunday, February 22nd, Palacastus again escaped from Athens' Korydallos prison by helicopter. He and his cellmate Alket Rizai, 34, climbed a rope ladder thrown to them by a female passenger in the helicopter as it flew over the prison courtyard. Guards on the ground opened fire and the woman fired back with an automatic rifle. No injuries were reported due to the short gunfight, although one prison guard injured himself while trying to pull out his gun. Police said an elderly couple found the helicopter abandoned in the Athenian suburb of Kapandridi, near a highway north of Athens, with its fuel tank leaking from a bullet hole. The pilot was bound and gagged with a hood over his head. He told police the helicopter was chartered by a couple who said they wanted to go from the town of Oedia in central Greece to Athens. The couple had chartered the helicopter a number of times in the previous weeks, with the woman posing as a businesswoman. According to the pilot, who claimed to have been forced into taking part in the escape, Palacastus and Rizai were delivered to a getaway car. The government of Greece faced intense criticism after a second escape from the same facility, and the government responded by firing 3 Justice Ministry officials and arresting 3 prison guards. Palacastus is still at large with a €1 million bounty placed on him for information leading to his arrest. His accomplice Alket Rizai was rearrested in November 2009. Number 10. John Dillinger. John Dillinger, one of the most notorious criminals in American history, was often glorified by the American media for his daring bank heists and thrilling prison escapes. He operated in the 20s and 30s during the Great Depression era, and was idolized by many as the modern-day Robin Hood, because he stole from those same institutions that were capitalizing on the American people's misfortunes. Dillinger's career as a criminal included over 11 bank robberies throughout the Midwest, in which he stole in excess of $300,000 and 3 separate jailbreaks. The mystique surrounding Dillinger's exploits was so captivating that people often forgot or turned a blind eye to the fact that he was responsible for at least 10 slaughters, including that of a sheriff, the passings of several innocent bystanders, and that he left a trail of carnage in his wake. Dillinger's activities, however, did not go unnoticed by Chief Investigator Melvin Purvis of the FBI, who is assigned the task of bringing Dillinger and his gang to justice. When J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI named Dillinger the first public enemy #1 on his 31st birthday in 1934, his fame took on a new meaning, and his name and face became recognizable in every household throughout the Midwest and the rest of the country. There was even a $10,000 reward for his capture. Now a public figure, Dillinger turned to plastic surgery to alter his identity and evade Purvis and the rest of the law enforcement community. In those days, plastic surgery was not as common as it is today, and the medical procedures were primitive, dangerous, time-consuming, and very painful. Dillinger underwent several bouts of plastic surgery, some more successful than others, but in the end he only managed to slightly alter his appearance. After one round of plastic surgery, from which he was extremely disappointed to find that he still looked the same, one of the doctors suggested that he remove his fingerprints as a way to escape being detected. Dillinger liked this idea and elected to undergo the painful process of obliterating his fingerprints. Number 9. Freddie Thompson. According to the New York Times, Freddie Thompson, 35, switched places with another prisoner during an arraignment. The other prisoner was facing a less serious charge of a leafy substance possession, and consequently, Thompson was mistakenly released. Thompson, who was caught for attempted execution and served prison time after pleading guilty to a lesser count including robbery charges, managed to fool authorities by making the identity change. It is unclear how exactly he was able to pose as the other prisoner during his arraignment in a Staten Island courtroom. The mistake points to a series of recent problems by the area's law enforcement agencies. In February, a prisoner posed as a different defendant at an arraignment on a lesser charge. That fugitive, Michael Bautista, 22, is still at large. Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly has rejected the idea that the escaped prisoner exploited a possible loophole. There are ways to verify a prisoner's identity, including checking pictures, he said, but apparently that may not have been done appropriately. Each year, about 400,000 arrests are made and prisoners are processed. The judge released Thompson on his own recognizance. Thompson walked out of court scot-free. It wasn't until several hours later, when the prisoner who Thompson impersonated asked why his name hadn't been called, that authorities realized a mistake had occurred. Number 8. Bela Kiss. Bela Kiss was a Hungarian serial executioner who cops believe ended 24 people. Kiss was nicknamed the Hungarian Pickler because he preserved his victims' bodies in large barrels. Born in Hungary in 1877, he had a rough childhood. In 1912, only a year after marrying his much younger wife, he discovered she was having an affair. Soon after, she and her lover would disappear. Although Kiss claimed that they had left together for a better life in America, the truth was that he ended both of them, becoming Kiss's first victims. This was the start of his execution spree, but for the rest of his victims, he lured women in. Through personal ads in the local Budapest newspaper, he placed ads under the name of Hoffman, claiming to be a lonely widower looking for marriage. He connected with women who were generally well off and whose families were not living nearby. His good looks and personable charm helped to attract them. He was even able to have some of the women sign over their wealth and give him money. Number 7. Frank Morris. In 1960, Frank Morris was sentenced to serve a prison term at Alcatraz. You know the place. The infamous penitentiary was built in 1934 on an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay. Isolated in the water more than a mile from San Francisco, it was designed as an inescapable jail. But when brothers Clarence and John Anglin got to Alcatraz in 1961 and befriended Morris, the trio decided to put the island's reputation to the test. The three men stuffed plaster dummies in their cell beds in the middle of the night. With roving guards believing the men were asleep, they quietly escaped through carefully cut holes in their cells. Once outside, they fashioned a makeshift raft out of raincoats and set sail into the bay in the middle of the night. They were never seen again. Initially, prison guards assumed the three men had been eaten by sharks. That is still a distinct possibility, but ocean currents would have undoubtedly brought body parts up to shore. Instead, no trace of the men's remains, clothes, or raft has ever been found. Because of that, authorities aren't actually certain whether they successfully escaped or not. If they did escape, however, you bet that they changed their names and their identities. Number 6. Between the spring of 1968 and the fall of 1969, 3 women were terminated in Glasgow, Scotland. Patricia Docker was strangled to passing in February 1968. Her crime went unpunished. A year later, Jemima McDonald was strangled in a nearby neighborhood. 2 months after that, Helen Puttick was also brutally ended in Glasgow. By then, cops started to realize similarities in all 3 slaughters. DNA testing wasn't the norm back then, but police picked up on patterns of how the girls were ended and where they were found. Cops also began to hone in on a description of the butcher, a redhead between the ages of 25 and 35 who's around 6 feet, 1.8 meters tall. Upon distributing a sketch to the media, cops labeled the butcher Bible John. It came from Puttick's passing. She and her sister had met 2 men during a night out on the town. Both men were named John. Puttick's date for the evening had an infatuation with quoting the Bible. Throughout the night, he delivered impassioned sermons from the book of Moses. The women jokingly called him Bible John. The name kinda stuck. Number 5. Frank Matthews. Frank Matthews was a notorious substance kingpin in the early 1970s. The New York City native was one of the largest suppliers of substances in the United States. His operations stretched from New York to Miami. Police believed Matthews cleared more than $20 million from his substance empire. He had a network of over 200 dealers working for him, all selling substances he bought from Colombian sources. His operation was so successful that it destroyed the profits of the rest of New York City's substance dealers. This led to tensions between Matthews and other dealers. In 1972, 2 of his associates were ended in a drive-by shooting. Matthews himself narrowly avoided being stopped when an explosive was placed under his car. In 1973, after an arrest, Matthews jumped bail and disappeared. Some believe he was ended by rivals, others say he went into hiding to avoid the lifelong prison sentence that surely would have followed. If he did go into hiding, then we know he changed his identity. That's just the smart thing to do. Number 4. The Freeway Phantom. The Freeway Phantom was a self-given moniker for a Washington, D.C. serial butcher who has never been identified. The butcher was active around America's capital in the early 1970s. In total, he ended 6 young women over a 17-month period. Like the Zodiac Butcher before him, the Freeway Phantom sent creepy messages to the police. After executing 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodard in November 1971, police found a note in one of her pockets. This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Freeway Phantom. The Phantom name stuck as police found more bodies near highways and other main thoroughfares around Washington. Police worked leads in the 6 passings, including one long look at 2 ex-cops who were convicted of a separate execution. However, they failed to make any headway in finding the butcher. In 1974, the FBI stepped in and added to the list of suspects. The Freeway Phantom appeared to leave as quickly as he arrived. No more passings were linked to his pattern after that awful 17-month period early in the decade, and soon the case went cold. The investigation is still active in DC to this day, though cops have been criticized for shoddy evidence keeping and a lack of progress on the awful case. Number 3. Victor Garena. Victor Garena was an employee of a Wells Fargo armored car in West Hartford, Connecticut in 1983. That summer, he was recruited by the militant group Los Macheteros to help with a bank heist. The activist group wanted independence for Puerto Rico. Their clandestine run had previously targeted American government officials. Now they were seeking money to fund their operations. Garena's knowledge of the armored car depot made him a natural recruit for Los Macheteros leader Juan Enrique Segura Palmer. When Garena led the heist on September 12, 1983, it all fell into place. The Wells Fargo employee tied up 2 of his co-workers and injected them with sedatives to make them fall asleep. He then loaded more than $7 million cash into a rental car and drove off. At the time, it was the largest cash heist in American history. Neither Garena nor the money was ever seen again. Segura Palmer wasn't so lucky. In 1985, the FBI tracked down Segura Palmer and 8 of his Los Macheteros peers in Puerto Rico. They were extradited to Connecticut and convicted on a variety of charges relating to the bank heist and other events. The ringleader was sentenced to 55 years in prison and served about 2 decades before being freed in 2004. Garena has likely fared far better though. He was never found. Number 2. John Ruffo. John Ruffo is one of the rare escaped fugitives not wanted for a violent crime. The businessman had a lengthy career scamming and defrauding investors to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. His most lucrative scheme, according to authorities, was to pose as an executive of the Philip Morris Tobacco Company and convince banks to grant him fraudulent loans. Cops claim Ruffo went around to banks boasting of a research program called Project Star. He would tell finance officials the project was geared toward developing smoke-free cigarettes for the tobacco giant, and they needed seed money to buy computers for the supposed research. It was all a ruse though. Banks would grant loans to Ruffo's company, CCS Inc., and he would simply vanish with the cash. For a while, he got away with the scheme and eventually pocketed some $350 million in phony investments. Number 1. Amado Carrillo. In the 1980s and 1990s, Amado Carrillo Fuentes was one of the most successful substance smugglers in North America. The Mexican man created an empire for the Juarez cartel. He smuggled more substances from Colombia to the United States than anyone else in the world. Cops knew him as the Lord of the Skies, for the fleet of private planes he used to fly massive quantities of substances all over the world. However, it all ended in the most unlikely way. Fuentes passed away in 1997 during plastic surgery. The substance kingpin had been trying to change his appearance to avoid being captured by DEA agents. Unfortunately, a surgical mishap left him passed on the operating table. With it, his substance empire came crashing down. For police, Fuentes' passing was bittersweet. The man they'd spent so much years chasing was removed and gone. He never faced justice over his substance empire though. By going to his grave prematurely, Fuentes forever avoided the wrath of the law. Number 10. A Chain of Stupidity. In the year 2000, a woman named Betty Lee was found executed in the middle of the desert in New Mexico. A man named Robert Fry and an accomplice managed to kidnap Betty and drove her out to the desert to end her life. On the way back from the crime scene, Fry's car got stuck in the dirt. So, Fry called his father, James Fry, to come and wrench him out with his pickup truck. Only one issue here, his dad also got stuck in the dirt. Now they had to call a pickup truck to get the both of them out of the mess. They called Floyd Robinson. Floyd drove his tow truck all the way into the desert of New Mexico, set up his professional equipment, and pulled the two cars out. Just kidding, he got stuck too. There were now, somehow, 3 cars in the middle of the desert that were completely stuck. They did the only thing they could think of and called another tow truck. Here comes Charlie Bergen. Charlie was on the end of his rope that night. He already had a bad night so far and had to drive out into the desert to unstuck 3 idiots. Shortly after driving to the scene, his wife called him and Charlie wasn't enjoying her nagging. He had bad reception and got frustrated at the entire situation, so he threw his phone into the sand and got the 3 others out of the desert. Charlie's phone was found near the scene of the crime and he was called in for questioning by the police. Charlie Bergen then recounted the story to the police, which led the police to follow the string of imbeciles back to the first guy, Robert Fry. Forensic evidence linked Fry to the body of Betty Lee and several others. Fry ended up getting stuck in the bin this time. Number 9. Bad park job. In June 2011, a young woman named Lauren Giddings was reported missing, so a pair of detectives pulled up to her apartment to start investigating. They found absolutely no trace of Giddings, but unknowingly they had already solved the case. When they parked, they did so in front of a row of trash cans. When the garbage man arrived to collect said bins, he couldn't get to the bins because of the cop car, so he left without grabbing the bags. Giddings' body was found in the uncollected trash later that day. In fact, her butcher was just a few feet away from the cops at the time. A local media station conducted a random interview with one of her neighbors, Stephen McDaniel. It was a pretty normal interview up until the media station reported live that Giddings' body was just recovered. McDaniel had been showing concern for his neighbor up until they reported this. The guy started being visibly uncomfortable about the interview from then on, and that put him on the radar of the police. Enough forensic evidence was discovered to link him to the crime, which he pleaded guilty to. Funny enough, McDaniel was about to take his bar exam in hopes of becoming a lawyer. Number 8. The Son of Sam. Summer 1976. New York City is terrorized by one of the most infamous Terminators of all time. Over the course of the next year, the unidentified man carried out a series of random shootings, which led to the passings of 6 people and the wounding of 7 others. He taunted the police and the media with anonymous letters, referring to himself as the Son of Sam. Here's one of his letters. I am deeply hurt by your calling me a woman hater. I am not, but I am a monster. I am the son of Sam. I'm a little brat. When Father Sam gets inebriated, he gets mean. He beats his family. Sometimes he ties me up to the back of the house. Other times he locks me in the garage. Sam loves to drink blood. Go out and execute, commands Father Sam. Behind our house, some rest. Mostly young, abused, and slaughtered. Their blood drained, just bones now. Papa Sam keeps me locked in the attic too. I can't get out, but I look out the attic window and watch the world go by. I feel like an outsider. I am on a different wavelength than everybody. The man turned out to be a postal employee named David Berkowitz. His motive? He said his dog was possessed by a demon and commanded him to execute people. In the early morning hours of July 31st, 1977, Berkowitz parked his car in a Brooklyn neighborhood. He walked several blocks to shoot his last 2 victims before returning to his vehicle and driving away. At some point during this series of events, a pair of patrolmen noticed that Berkowitz's car was parked in front of a fire hydrant and ticketed it. Later on, someone was walking their dog, normally, at 2 in the morning when they noticed a man sprint to their car, which had a ticket on the windshield. The woman reported it to the police and they traced it right back to Berkowitz. Number 7. Stolen property. In 1997, a South African woman gave birth to a baby girl named Zephany Nurse. In a bizarre turn of events, Zephany Nurse was abducted from the hospital by an unidentified woman, disguised as a nurse. Nearly 18 years went by without any sign of Zephany. By that time, her mother Celeste had 3 more children, and one of her daughters, Cassidy, was starting high school. Cassidy soon became close friends with another girl at her school. The two hit it off almost instantly, like they were long-lost sisters. You see where this is going. Once Cassidy's father noticed the amazing physical similarities between the two girls, he contacted police. DNA testing soon revealed that the older girl was in fact the missing child. Zephany and the woman she didn't realize was her kidnapper had spent the past 17 years living only a few miles away from the Nurse family. Number 6. Parrot Patrol. In 1942, Max Geller, the owner of the Green Parrot restaurant, was shot inside his establishment. There were around 20 witnesses, but nobody wanted to come forward. There was one witness willing to snitch, however. A large green parrot who, not coincidentally, lived at the Green Parrot restaurant. When police questioned the bird, it exclaimed, "Robert! Robert!" The investigation went nowhere for a year, but eventually a detective figured that something about the parrot's testimony didn't quite add up. The bird had been trained to learn the names of frequent restaurant guests so that he could greet them at the door, which actually sounds like a pretty sick gimmick. What if the parrot was saying Robert? That's a plot twist even M. Night Shyamalan would reject for being too stupid. But the cops checked into it anyway. They discovered that the Green Parrot did indeed have a regular customer named Robert Butler, and that Butler had conveniently left town right after the shooting and was now living in another state. It should be noted that at this point, the police had less than no case, because in the state of New York at least, the testimony of a parrot is ridiculously dumb. But Butler must have had some real respect for the integrity of that bird, because upon being told that he'd been figured out by Geller's parrot, he admitted to the crime immediately. Number 5. The search for the wrong person. On November 21st, 1990, Unsolved Mysteries featured the case of Nylene Marshall, who vanished in 1983 while picnicking with her family near Helena, Montana. It was assumed that she had been abducted. As a result of the broadcast, hundreds of viewers called the telecenter with possible sightings of Nylene. One of the callers was a school official in Vancouver, British Columbia. They said that Nylene may be living in the tiny community of Point Roberts, Washington, under an assumed name. Every day, a girl named Mary Ann Kelly was driven to school in Vancouver by her father, Robert William Kelly. School officials who came in contact with Robert felt that he was suspicious. First of all, he was difficult to contact. He never had a telephone number where he could be reached. If they asked him for an address, he would say that they were between addresses. School officials were especially concerned about Robert's actions when he would drop off Mary Ann at school. When school would start, she would go into her classroom. He would get out of his car and look into the classroom's windows to make sure she was there. Her teacher was especially frightened by this, and I would be too. After the broadcast, Mary Ann's teachers began to suspect that she was Nylene. School officials contacted the FBI, who put Mary Ann and Robert under surveillance. The agents also reviewed her school records and discovered that they were false. Initially, agents were afraid to approach Robert, assuming that he was Nylene's kidnapper. They did not want to spook him and allow him to escape with Nylene. In December 1990, FBI agents arrived at the Kelly home with a search warrant. They searched the house extensively. Eventually, in a closet, they found a box labeled bathroom articles. In it was a photo album with pictures of Guillermo, Monica, and Rosemary, and Monica's birth certificates. It became clear that Mary Ann was not Nylene, but was in fact Monica. Guillermo was arrested and agreed to surrender himself to Los Angeles authorities to face charges of parental kidnapping. Monica was then taken into protective custody. Number 4. From petty theft to felony charge. On June 2nd, 1985, Leonard Thomas Lake and Charles Chatat Eng were visiting the South City lumber store in San Francisco. Eng was seen stealing a $75 table vise from the store, and when confronted by an employee, he threw the vise into the trunk of a car, a 1980 Honda Prelude. He fled the scene on foot, leaving Lake to fend for himself. The police were contacted and arrived soon after. Lake insisted that he paid for the vise. Meanwhile, the police, when searching through the car, discovered a gun with an illegal silencer equipped to it. Lake used the driver's license of Robin Scott Stapley, who had been missing for weeks. Lake did not resemble Stapley and appeared significantly older, with Lake being 39 years old while Stapley was 26. The gun itself was registered to the real Stapley. The Honda was registered to Paul Costner, and the license plate to Lonnie Bond, both of whom were also missing. Leonard Lake was thus arrested and brought to the police station. He revealed his real identity as well as that of Charles Eng. He then asked for a glass of water and a piece of paper and then wrote a note to his ex-wife and family before swallowing a cyanide pill he had hidden in his shirt. Lake was rushed to a hospital but was declared passed away and unplugged from life support 4 days later. Law enforcement became very suspicious of his taking his own life and visited a cabin in Calaveras County that he was residing in, owned by his ex-wife Clara Lynn Balaz. On the property, a dungeon had been built close to the cabin, which upon further inspection contained a hidden prison cell. Scattered around the property, pounds of crushed and charred human bones were discovered, and entire bodies were found buried in the ground. Also discovered were videotapes of Lake and Eng subjecting women to threats and abuse. Lake was discovered to have a fantasy about kidnapping women to keep in his dungeon as his personal slaves in the event of a nuclear apocalypse, in a plan he called Operation Miranda after a kidnapped female character named Miranda in the book The Collector, a book Lake was obsessed with and inspired by. There were possibly up to 25 victims, with several being unidentifiable. Charles Eng was captured around a month later in Calgary, Canada, after yet again shoplifting. He was imprisoned for 4.5 years in Canada for shoplifting and for shooting the security guard who caught him shoplifting. Number 3. Photo finish. On April 5th, 2008, Engla Jankosa Hoagland went missing on her way home from soccer practice in Stjörsund, Sweden. When she did not answer her mobile phone, Engla's mother, Carina Hoagland, went looking for her and found her daughter's abandoned bicycle in the woods. The mother quickly suspected foul play and stated that her daughter did not have the physical strength to dispose of the bicycle in that way. By coincidence, a man was out testing his new digital camera around the time of Hoagland's disappearance, and he took photos of his surroundings, including one photo of Engla Hoagland riding her bike. The man also took a photo of a red Saab 900 following the young girl. Honestly, any Saab driver should probably be on a list. The driver of the car was later revealed to be Anders Eklund. After the photographer stepped forward and showed police his photos, Eklund was identified and consequently arrested. On April 13, 2008, after days of interrogation by experts from Rikskriminalpolisen, Eklund confessed to the execution and disclosed the location of Hoagland's body. During these interrogations, Eklund also confessed to the execution of Pernilla Hellgren. Number 2. Patty Ain't No Saint. On June 16, 1976, Patrick Kearney ended Michael Craig McGee of Redondo Beach. Records confirmed that McGee had a lengthy history of juvenile delinquency. Kearney claimed to have picked up McGee, who was hitchhiking from Inglewood Avenue near Lenox to Torrance. According to the police, Kearney had befriended the man and invited him to attend a camping trip to Lake Elsinore over the course of a weekend. Kearney claimed to have perceived McGee as a potential threat and shot him without warning, after McGee openly boasted of his personal criminal exploits and inquired about the presence and location of burglar alarms in Kearney's home. Later, when interviewed by detectives, Kearney implied that he had destroyed the remains, stating, "I disposed of the body. You aren't going to find him." The victim who ultimately led to Kearney's arrest was John Otis LeMay, whom he removed from the world on Sunday, March 13, 1977. At approximately 5:30 p.m. on that same day, LeMay had told a neighbor he was going to Redondo Beach to meet a man named Dave, whom he had met at a local gym. This was in fact David Hill, who had given LeMay the address to Kearney's home. Hill was absent when LeMay arrived, so Kearney invited him in to watch television until Hill returned. Without provocation, Kearney impulsively reached for his pistol and shot LeMay in the back of the head. Kearney later dismembered the corpse and dumped the remains in the desert. When his execution spree was at its zenith, Kearney's odd tendencies were largely undetected. A local grocery store owner named Jerry Stevens did, however, note that Kearney was frequently purchasing butcher knives after examining them and inquiring about the quality of the steel. Stevens also described Kearney as a loser with an eerie sense of quiet about him. Kearney's supervisor at Hughes Aircraft referred to him as a model worker though. Number 1. License Plate Patrol. Rifkin committed his first execution on February 20th, 1989, executing Heidi Balch in his home in East Meadow. He then dismembered her body, removing her teeth and fingertips, putting her head in a paint can which he left in the woods on a golf course in Hopewell, New Jersey, disposing of her legs further north, and dumping her remaining torso and arms into the East River around New York City. On March 5th, 1989, Balch's severed head was discovered on the 7th hole of the golf course. On April 8th, 1989, Balch's legs were found in Pequannock Creek near Jefferson Township, New Jersey. Her remains were not identified until 2013. It was assumed that Rifkin executed 16 more women during the next 4 years. He was implicated in Balch's execution after his arrest in 1993. Investigators determined in 2013 that Balch and the woman he described as his first victim were the same person. Rifkin picked up Tiffany Brashani, an intimate worker who was working on Allen Street in Manhattan, on June 24, 1993. Tiffany was with her boyfriend, punk rock musician Dave Rubenstein. Rifkin told Rubenstein that she was going to be returning in 20 minutes. Rubenstein called the police with a description of the 1984 Mazda pickup truck that Rifkin drove, after Tiffany failed to return. On June 28, 1993, state troopers patrolling Long Island Southern State Parkway noticed the pickup truck without a license plate. After pulling Rifkin over, they found Brashani's body under a tarpaulin. He was found guilty of 9 counts of second-degree execution in 1994 and sentenced to 203 years up to life in prison.